Now here's a new word, oceanomics. Well, to be fair, it's a made-up word, but it's a good way of contemplating the value of the ocean's riches. If you were to think about the ocean as an economy, you'd be looking at output worth around $2.5 trillion a year. That would pop the ocean, as it were, in at number 7 in the world's top 10 economies after the US, China, Japan, Germany, France and the UK. It generates hundreds of millions of jobs in sectors like tourism, fishing and shipping, and billions of people rely on it as a food source. Those numbers come from a new WWF report, which we'll discuss in a moment with our guests. But first, we have to think about where this economy is going wrong. The ocean's resources are being eroded, potentially brought down entirely by overfishing, disappearing coral reefs and endemic mangrove destruction. This from our environment editor, Nick Clark, here in Qatar.
Oceans cover more than 2/3 of our planet. Not only a vast multi-trillion-dollar resource, but also crucial in the cycle of life itself. On the shores of the Gulf, a research team from Qatar's Environmental Studies Centre, on its way to study a vital component of the world's oceans, mangroves. The salt marshes here providing an ecosystem uniquely adapted to the Gulf's extreme conditions and home to all types of animals. They're also capable of storing up to 8 times more CO2 than tropical forests, and it's important to understand how they work.
We are looking at the capability of the mangrove to absorb nutrients, the capability for it to store carbon, the support it gives to the local fisheries and the species diversity in the Gulf.
And the bottom line is, fragile ecosystems like mangroves are fundamental to the general state of health of the world's oceans.
The problem is that mangroves are being ripped up and destroyed along coastlines all over the world. In fact, the rate of loss is more than 3 times that of deforestation on land. And of course, as far as oceans are concerned, it doesn't end there.
According to a worldwide Fund for Nature report, the entire multi-trillion-dollar marine resource is in danger of failing. The oceans are changing faster than at any other point in tens of millions of years, with intense pressure from overfishing, pollution and acidification.
The acceleration that we have seen in the last particularly 100 years is staggering. And, ecosystems like oceans can recover, and this is the good news, can recover very fast if we don't reach the tipping point, if we don't reach the no return point. But we are at risk in the next 20 years or so that if this continues, actually the ocean will not be able to recover for hundreds of years, for generations to come.
The message is we are running down our ocean assets and pushing the marine economy into the red. By couching the ocean's now flagging health in sheer monetary terms, the report's authors hope they're speaking a language the world's decision makers may just understand.
We're off to Brisbane, Australia now to talk more about this. Joining us is the director of the Global Change Institute there in Queensland, Ove Goldberg, who's also the lead writer on that report. Ove, thank you for your time. Take me through how you quantify what an ocean economy is.
Well, what this study did, and it really took an economic view on this resource that we often treat as endless. And so working with the Boston Consulting Group, literally went to a number of assets that could be identified, those that could be measured, and then came up with sort of some market values. So if you take fisheries, for example, and you take the biomass of fish, the sort of average price per kilogram of fish and so on, you can get to the sort of asset size. Then if you know the productivity of that, you can actually then get an estimate of sort of the dividend that pays. Now you go across tourism, a whole bunch of sectors, shipping, trade and so on, and you get to this $24 trillion, which is, if it were a country, would be the 7th largest economy on the planet.
Right, so this is the thing. When you have an economy of that size, as it were, you have to nurture it, you have to protect it and get the most out of it. Is that actually happening? Are there people and groups out there who actually treat it that way, given that the oceans provide so much economic output and so many jobs and livelihoods all over the world?
Well, under ideal circumstances with an asset performing, such an enormous role, because we're deriving around $2.5 trillion in benefits each year from this ocean asset. And you'd think that there'd be great steps to essentially preserve the asset. But unfortunately, we're eroding the asset. And of course, that's eventually and already affecting the dividend that it can pay in terms of support for humanity. So really that's what we are trying to do in this study, is to sort of say, okay, here's the asset, here's what it's delivering each year, and then of course, are we looking after it? And of course the answer is no. When you look at fisheries, you've got 90% of them on the planet which are either fully exploited or are in collapse, they're overexploited. You look at the way we're dealing with coastal tourism and we're degrading the very assets that industry depends on. And so the bottom line is that if we are really, this is an economic system that we're depending on, we need to now push the reset button and start to look at this as an asset that we need to preserve. And that's what this report's about.
Yeah, problem is, and not to be defeatist about it at all, is that this is a really difficult job. It's easy to exploit. There's a heck of a lot of water and ocean in this world, and trying to protect it or police it is a real uphill task.
Well, we think there is a way to solve this problem, and it really comes down to a series of actions that we need to strive towards. Now, we're not going to get the fisheries fixed up overnight, but we can start to work towards, now we know what the problem is, we can start to work towards solutions. So when you take tuna fisheries, the big problem there is that they're being overexploited, not just because people don't care, it's because these stocks range between countries across international borders, and often into the open ocean where there's no sort of jurisdiction. It's actually trying to get solutions to those sorts of problems which really need the multilateral collaboration. And so this is really just being practical. It's saying, look, what are the problems, what are the solutions, and we can move towards them. I mean, things like climate change, with the COP21 coming up at the end of the year, anyone who understands the problem we will move to a solution, because not to is going to be extremely problematic. So yes, it's an ambitious study, but it's essentially setting the goals, the landscape, in a language that business and government should understand.
Just briefly, of what sort of, and I know this is a new report which has come out, but what sort of reactions do you get from governments? If you say that you're trying to build this in a way that people will understand, are they responding to it? We've
got very positive feedback from almost all sectors. This is a problem which I think most people have had a feeling about for some time. When you look at the fact that, the state of the ocean in terms of plastic pollution, the state of our fisheries and so on, and then you start to put it in these economic terms, I think it clarifies and I think has appealed to a lot of people. Now we know what the problem is, we know that it's valuable, there's no question about that. Now we need to move to those solutions. So in a way, counting the cost here has been quite important, because that's the language of governments and companies.
Ove Hogelberg talking oceanomics with us on Counting the Cost. We thank you very much for your time this week.